Hey guys, so here we are, part 2 of our adding integers with different signs. So last lesson we modeled with integers, our counters, and we used a number line. So just like with part 2 of adding with same signs, using counters and number lines are not great when we are dealing with bigger numbers, even anything past 10. So we have to apply a rule so that we can add numbers that are bigger than 10. So same I can, because we're still working on the same thing. So add integers with different signs. I can. So hopefully in the next couple of days, you'll be able to say, yep, you can. So today's key terms, we actually have 2 today. So really make sure you pause and get those down as sum. Just to review, the total to an addition problem. So if you're asked to find the sum, just means add them together and find out what they are. And then the other word is a zero pair. So we actually saw 0 pairs in our last lesson. And those were those 0 pairs I was making with a positive and a negative. And so that's what it is. It's adding one positive integer to one negative integer. I'm just fixing the fact that I spelled the word positive wrong. So that's where I was making those zeros. One positive with one negative. So the rule that we have when we are adding with different signs is we're going to actually subtract the lesser or smaller absolute value from the greater absolute value. Remember, absolute value is the distance something is away from 0. So we're going to take the bigger number and subtract the smaller number. Then we are going to take the sign of the integer with the bigger absolute value. So you can see absolute values are really important. And if you notice, it says subtract, but we're adding. Now think about our lesson last time. Yeah, we added, but we really started taking things away. Things started to disappear. So like in the counters, we got zeros. It means they disappeared. And with the number line, I went the opposite direction. And if you think about it, subtraction is the opposite of addition. And so that's why when you're adding with different signs, you're actually subtracting. So let's start first by finding the absolute values. So the absolute value of negative 11 will be 11. And the absolute value of 6 will be 6. Well, 6 is smaller than 11. So we're just going to subtract 11, take away 6 would be 5. Okay. Now we have to, second part, take the sign of the greater absolute value. So the greater absolute value was 11. And in the beginning, it was a negative. And since negative 11 has the bigger absolute value, it means our final answer will also be negative. And that's what that rule is saying. Subtract and take the sign of the bigger absolute value. So you can see in example 2, those are pretty big. I don't want to use a number line or a counter. Okay, so absolute value of 27 is 27, right? An absolute value of negative 30 would be 30. So we're going to take 30, subtract 27, because it has a larger absolute value. Okay, don't forget to borrow. 10 take away 7 is 3, and 2 take away 2 is 0, and so we get 3. But then we have to remember the sign of the greater absolute value is the sign we take in the end. So 30 is the greater absolute value, and it is linked with negative 30, and so our final answer will actually be -3. And that's how you apply the rule. And that's, if you think about it, that's what we did yesterday as well. We really subtracted, and however or whatever one we had more of in the end was the sign we had. And that's kind of what we're doing. I have more negatives in number 2 than I do positives. So I end up with negatives. Same with example 1. I had more negatives than I did positives. So that's how I ended up with a negative answer. Okay, so I want you to try these 4. I want you to pause and try them. You can either write fully all the absolute values, or you can just take the absolute values like I did for example 2, just kind of off to the side. But don't forget, we're actually going to subtract and then take the sign of the larger absolute value. So pause here and try these 4, 7 through 10. When you're done, push play. So here's number 7. So the absolute value of 51, -51 is 51. And the absolute value of 23 is 23. And since 51 is larger than 23, I'm going to subtract. Don't forget to borrow. You cannot take 3 from 1. So 11, 10, 9, 8. And then 4 take away 2 is 2. But if we go back to the original, -51 is the larger absolute value. So our final answer should be -28. I had more negatives than I did positives. So I'm going to have more negatives to finish. Okay, so 8. Absolute value of -18 is 18. That's the larger. I'm going to subtract absolute value of 10, which is 10. So I get 8. 1 take away 1 is 0. And because 18 is the larger absolute value and that's the negative, it's -8. More negatives, I end with negatives. Okay, number 9. So absolute value of 13 is 13. Absolute value of -13 is actually 13. And 13 take away 13 is 0. And we don't have to worry about negatives or positives because there's no positives or negatives of 0. Plus, they both have the same absolute value. So how would you decide positive or negative? So 0 is just 0. And then the last one, 10. Okay, absolute value of -26 is 26. Absolute value of 25 is 25. You subtract, you get 1. But -26 had the larger absolute value. So we go -1. More negatives, final answer will be negative. Okay, things to remember. Adding with different signs really means subtract. Subtract. And keep the sign of the bigger, there we go, absolute value, or whatever you want to remember. Bigger is the sign. And then don't forget your questions. Okay, questions are super important. Ask me whatever about the topic, about a problem. If you had a hard time with number 7, if you had a hard time with number 9, ask that so I can go over it. Remember, only I will see your question. So do not just leave this blank if you have a question. If you leave it blank, I don't know and I want to know. Okay, don't forget your form. It's my attendance and your assignment. It will go in as a grade, so do not forget to do that. If you see this afternoon it's not entered and your assignment's marked missing, means I did not get your form. Also message me if you have any questions about tech or issues.